probably. Helps if you press the right button.
Try that. Are we on? There we go. Cool. I have no Weetabix this morning. The front row can relax. I'm not going to spit anything at them. Put that up. I want to start by asking a question. Has anybody, and I'm sure everybody will say yes, has anybody ever had to wait for anything? Yes. Either spiritually or physically, we've all had to wait for something. And I sort of sat there last night trying to think of, okay, what's the one thing I can think of that I've really had to wait for? And loads of things sprung to mind. One of them was my guitar. I had to save up for ages to get that. It took me months and months and months of saving to be able to buy the guitar that I wanted. And the worst part was that just as I decided I wanted to buy a nice guitar, I then started looking. Now that was a mistake. What I should have done is save for a little bit first and then started looking, because I started looking straight away, found the guitar I wanted, and then had to wait months before I could actually go out and buy it. And so it was there, tantalisingly close, but not able to get to it. But that wasn't the thing that sprung to my mind when I was trying to think of stuff that I had to wait for. The thing that instantly sprung to mind was a bread pudding that I cooked once, which might seem a little bit strange, but I was house sitting for Kate and Howard, and they'd left a loaf of bread, and I'd been there all week and I'd not used this loaf of bread. And at about 6:30, I'd just finished eating my tea, and I thought, I really fancy some bread pudding. You know, and sometimes you just get a hankering for it. And I thought, I've never cooked bread pudding before. That might be something fun to try. So at 6:30, I decided I would go out to the shop and buy the ingredients I needed for the bread pudding. So I popped down to the shop. Kate has a wonderful supply of all different kinds of cooking stuff, but I had not got a clue which type of sugar was which. So I had to go out and buy my own kind of sugar, because she's got jars full of them, but they all look the same to me. They're all either white or brown, and I have no idea what is what. So I went down to the shop and I bought it's like mascarpone sugar. It's not mascarpone, but it's something like that. So I looked at the ingredients that I needed. I bought it everyone's laughing because they know it's not. That's cheese, I know. I know it's cheese, but I cannot, no, it began with an M, but I can't remember. Muscovado, that's right. It was like Muscovado. Yeah, see, the cooks are all telling me. I didn't know. I went to Co-op and found it on the shelf and thought that will do. So I went out, I bought all the stuff. Got back, it was probably like 7:30 before I got back, and so I started prepping it all, getting it all ready, and by the time I'd finished prepping it and getting it into the pan, it was probably 8:15, 8:30, and so I thought I'll just throw it in the oven, and I was really looking forward to this bread pudding. But then I had to sit there and wait for probably an hour and a half for this bread pudding to cook, and I was fine with the 2 hours up to that point because I was doing something, but as soon as I had to stop and just wait for it, it was the longest hour and a half of my life. I've never had to wait so long for a piece of bread pudding. And then of course I get it out of the oven and it's red hot. And I'm so desperate to eat this bread pudding that I cut it into slices to hope that it'll cool down quicker. And when I think that I can just about get away with only taking the top layer of skin off my tongue, I think I will eat that piece of bread pudding. And I ate it, and it was absolutely lovely. I loved it. I brought some into Bible college the next day, and everybody else ate it also. I didn't get fat. But I ate that bread pudding, and it was wonderful, but I had to wait for it. And as Simon said, we're talking this month about discovering purpose, and sometimes we have to wait for the evidence of the purpose that God's put in our lives. Sometimes we have to wait to know what it is. Sometimes we have to wait to see it come to pass. And one of the things I wanted to look at was the story of Joseph. Many of us will know it. Most of you, if you've been in church for any period of time, will have heard the story of Joseph. If you haven't, it's sort of from Genesis 37 through to the end of the book. You can read about it when you go home. That's your homework for anyone who hasn't read it. But I sort of thought, okay, what can we take from Joseph's life? Because I instantly think of Joseph as somebody who had to wait a bit for stuff to come to pass. And so I've got 7 things that we can take from the story of Joseph. If you're taking notes, you can put 7 things from the story of Joseph. The first thing that sort of instantly sprung to mind was you have to have a dream or a vision. There is no point in trying to find out the purpose for your life if you have no dream or vision, if you have no purpose. Now in Jeremiah 29:11 it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." So God knows the plans that he has for us. So it's a case of us finding out what those plans are for our life. God's already got it sorted. He knew from the beginning of time what we were planned to do. He created us in exactly the right way to be able to do that plan. But we've got to then find out what that plan is. So how do we find it out? Well, Romans 12:2 says, Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may know what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So if we renew our minds, if we transform our minds, if we become more Christ-like in our thinking, then we begin to reveal, or God begins to reveal to us, his perfect will for our lives and for the people around us. And I think about Joseph, and Joseph had a dream. Martin Luther King got famous for his dream, but Joseph had it first. Joseph had a dream, and God revealed this dream to him, that all his brothers and his family would bow down before him. Now, one of the things I find interesting is that God revealed the vision, but he didn't reveal the process that it would take. I can kind of imagine Joseph, he's a teenager, he's 17 years old, he's like, right, Dad, I'm off to bed, because that's all teenagers do, is they sleep and eat. So he went to bed, and he's like, right, he goes to sleep. And God speaks to him, he says, Joseph, I have a vision for you. And he reveals this vision of these wheat sheaves bowing down around his. And he says, this is going to be your family, they're all going to bow down around you. And Joseph said, wow, it's amazing. Everybody's going to bow down around me. I'm going to be special. He's starting to feel a little bit big-headed already. He says, God, how's it going to happen? And he says, well, you don't need to know that. It'll happen. And Joseph, no, tell me what's going to happen. What's it going to be like? And so God says, well, okay, so first of all, everybody's going to hate you. Then you're going to be thrown into a pit, nearly killed, put into slavery. Then when you're in slavery, you're going to be accused of trying to sleep with somebody. Then you're going to be put into prison. Then once you're in prison, you're going to be forgotten about for a bit. And then after you're forgotten about, then the vision will come to pass. And Joseph says, that doesn't sound so good, God. But it's only going to be a short period of time. It's not going to last forever. Like, this isn't going to... Actually, it's probably going to be about 13 years, Joseph. At this point, I think Joseph probably would have said, you know what, God? I'm happy with the coat. I'll just stick with the really nice coat that my father's given me. You keep that vision. I'm his favourite already. There's no need for all of this. I'll just keep my coat. If God had revealed everything that was going to happen to Joseph right at the beginning with that vision, Joseph probably would have just settled for his coat and said, you know what, this will do. This is nice. I can do with tending sheep for the rest of my life. Sometimes we don't actually know what the vision is. We can never sort of grasp the full picture. One of the things I was thinking about when we were away at Soul Survivor, it sort of popped into my mind, was we don't need to know exactly what the script says. We just need to know that there is a script. We don't need to know what the Maker's plans are for our lives, but we just need to know the Maker. It's not just about knowing that there is a Maker, but it's knowing the Maker personally. And you can sit there and say, well, I just don't know what to do. I have so many ideas of where I should be going, or I have absolutely no idea of where I should be going. How do I get ideas from God? James chapter 1 verse 5 says, if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. If we don't have wisdom, if we don't know what we should be doing, God says, ask him. Come to God, and he gives liberally to all without reproach. But he says, but ask in faith, not doubting. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, bounded about by the wind. And do not let him suppose that he will receive anything, for he is a double-minded man. And it goes on to say that. So when we ask God, we have to have faith that we'll receive wisdom from him, that we'll receive answers from him. Otherwise, we're double-minded. We have one mind on God, but our other half of us is thinking, well, okay, if God's plan fails, what do I do? I think if God had told Joseph from the start exactly what was going to happen, Joseph probably would have been putting some contingencies in and started saying, okay, so I'm going to avoid my brothers for a little bit because they're going to start hating me. And if I see any pits around, I'm going to start running away. And if I see some slave traders coming, then I'm definitely going to hightail it out. He would have started putting some contingency plans in. Joseph probably would have become a nomad that just sat in a tent all day and hid from everybody and hoped that the plan would still come together. Has anybody ever done that? You kind of just sit in a tent hiding from God and hope that the plan just kind of comes together anyway. God said this is going to happen, so I'll just sit over here nice and safe until it does. It doesn't tend to work like that. But there has to be a vision. That's the most important part, is we have to have a vision. Proverbs 29 verse 18 says, where there is no vision, the people perish. And everybody knows that part of the verse. But I find it quite interesting to carry on reading the second half, and it says, where there is no vision, the people perish. But he that keeps the law, he is happy, or happy is he. Why the law? Are we not free from the law? Have we not been set free from that? Well, the law is the word of God. It's the written word that the people of Israel had that spoke to God. So how do we find out the vision from God? We listen to his word. We listen to him. We listen to him speaking into our lives. You know, everything that we do should be about vision. It should be about what we plan to do, what God plans to do through us. Victory Churches International, their vision is to reach every available person, to teach them the word of God, and then to mobilize them and equip them to go out back into the world. You know, and then we could look at Victory Church Rugeley, and it could be to reach Rugeley with the love of Christ, to welcome those into the eternal family and to equip them to fulfill the calling of God on their lives. Victory Church Rugeley has a vision, it has a purpose. What's your purpose? What's your individual purpose, your personal, unique purpose? And you can only find out that purpose from God. Some of you might be sat there saying, well, I'm kind of at the end. I've done what God's called me to do. I'm kind of just seeing it through now. Let me tell you, God still has more planned for your life. Whatever you've already done, God still has more planned. When I think of vision, the first thing I kind of think of is not Joseph, but Gideon. Gideon's another person in the Bible that many of you will have heard of. And the Bible says that he was the least of his clan, and his clan was the least of all the clans. Now, what I find very interesting is if we were to sort of put this into relatable terms, let's imagine for a minute that Stafford decides to come and invade Rugeley, and they send over a fifth of their best warriors, and they say, right, we're going to take Rugeley for our own, and we're going to merge it. It's going to become Rugeley Ford or something like that. It's going to merge together with Stafford, and they're going to own Rugeley. And so they come and they take it, and we're sat here, and they squash us all into one corner of the town. They squash us all into Brayton because nobody wants to be there. They squash us all into Brayton, and they take the rest of I'm in trouble now. They take the rest of Rugeley for us. I'm half expecting about a fifth of the congregation to leave at some point, but they take us and they squeeze us into Brayton, and then they leave the rest of the town for themselves. And we're all like, well, this is terrible. But we don't do a lot about it, and we just sort of put up with it for a little while. And then the least of the least, now I'm not going to start picking the least, that would be dangerous. So what I'm going to go on is purely by height. We'll say Stuart and Lisa's Isabel. So Isabel comes up to, Isabel's this high. Isabel, well, she's probably a little bit littler, but I can't get much lower than that. So Isabel comes up to Will, who's sort of this high, and she says, Will, I have a plan to take back Rugeley for ourselves. And Will says, that's really nice, Isabel. And Isabel sort of looks away and goes, well, they're not listening to me. Eh? Higher pitch. If I do that, I will not be able to finish the rest of my preaching. So Isabel goes away, and rather than giving up, she decides, okay, I'm going to get their attention. I'm going to unhook the battery from Mick's chair. I'm going to make it so he can't move anywhere. It's kind of what Gideon does, not exactly the same, but he defaces a relic, he defaces an object of worship. And so they come the next day, and we come back. Obviously, Mick's chair is not an object of worship, but I'm trying to make it relatable. So we come back next Sunday, and Mick's still sat there on his own. He can't move anywhere, his battery's been unhooked. And so rather than getting really mad at Isabel, for some reason we decide, actually, she must have a point. She must know what she's talking about. So we start to listen to Isabel, and we say, okay, Isabel, what's the plan? We're all with you. All 100 of us are ready to go and fight the Staffordites and take them and defeat them and kick them out of Rugeley and take it back for ourselves. And Isabel says, no, I don't want all of you. No, I want about 5 of you. That'll do. And we think, but a fifth of Stafford has come to defeat us. And they've taken over the town, and you want 5. And Isabel, who's all the way down there, she's like, yes, I want 5 of you, and we can do it. And Pastor Will's like, okay, we can do it. And so they pick the 5 best people, and they go and do it. Now, how did Gideon, we'll go back to Gideon for a second, but how did Gideon capture people to be able to get on board with his vision, being the least of the least, and say, you know what, actually, we'll go and do it. We can do this. The way I see it is Gideon gained a following by seeing the desires of the hearts of the people, and then he gave them a vision of how to accomplish it. So many people have a desire within their hearts, but they don't see a vision of how they can do it. They don't see a way that it can be done. All the people of Israel were fed up with the captivity that they were in, but they couldn't see a way out of it. They couldn't see a way to defeat the Philistines. What Gideon saw was a vision of how we can do it, and he said, let's go do it. This is how. And what you realize is that actually when we have God's vision, when we have God's plan and purpose and the steps that he has for us, that it doesn't take hundreds, it doesn't take thousands of people, but it just takes a few people who can grasp hold of the vision and run with it. You see, their desire was for salvation. They wanted to be saved from the torment that they were in, from the oppression that was around them. And that's exactly the same thing that people are in today. They want to be saved from the circumstances that they're in, and they want to find a better way of life. How much more perfect are we to be able to go and tell them of that better way? To be able to show them that actually God is the better way, that we can show them a way of salvation. You know, in John 1:14 it says, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. The glories of the only begotten Father, full of grace and truth. You know, grace saves us. Ephesians 2 verse 8 says, for by grace you have been saved through faith. But truth sets us free. You know, John 8:32, you shall know the truth and the truth will set you free. Grace saves people and truth sets them free. You can be saved but not free. You know, there will be people who go through their entire life knowing God, being saved but never being set free from the things that hold them back. God came so that you would have grace and truth, that you would be set free as well as being saved, that you wouldn't just be saved and then have to put up with exactly the same that you've been through, but you would be saved and set free from all those things that hold you back. That's my first point, is that we have to have a vision. The second point is this: who you reveal the vision to will affect the way that your vision goes. Yes. Joseph, when he started to reveal his vision, he had the vision from God. He said, okay, God, I can do this. The first people he went and told was his brothers. That doesn't sound like the wisest idea to me. If I had a vision that said, all of my family and all of my friends are going to bow down to me, they're not the people I'm going to go and tell. Because being the youngest, or one of the youngest in the family, no one's going to want that. So Joseph goes and tells his brothers, and his brothers start to hate him. They instantly despise him. And his father rebukes him. But there's an interesting difference between his brothers and his father. You see, his brothers hated him and chucked it to one side, said that's never going to happen. But his father rebuked him, but he remembered what had been said. There are people around you that will completely put you down when you have a vision and a purpose. You get this vision from God and you think, this is what I'm supposed to do. Some people will completely put you down and say, you will never be able to do that. There is no chance that is going to happen. Other people will remember what you say and they'll get on board with it. Now, it might not happen straight away. The most important thing to think is, who do we say it to and when do we say it? We have to allow that vision to start to grow, to begin to take root within our hearts. Once that's taken root, it's much harder to get out. I do a lot of gardening for work, and sometimes you have to dig out roots, and the ones that have been in longer, the ones that have established themselves, are much harder to get out than the ones that you just potted and planted yesterday. If you just planted them yesterday, someone can come along and rip it out. If it's been planted and established and grown, then it takes a lot more to get it out. And that's what we have to do with our vision. We get the vision from God, but then we have to allow it to be planted, to grow within us, and to find the people that will nurture that vision, to find the people that will say, okay, I can get on board with that vision. Point number 3 is this: sometimes your vision will require you to become a foreigner. You know, Joseph was taken off into a foreign land and taken away from all the comforts that he knew. He had to make sacrifices. He no longer had his home, which was his safe place. He no longer had, the passion must have been drained from him that he got this vision, but all of a sudden he's taken to a faraway land, miles and miles away from his brothers, the people who are supposed to bow down to him. How can that vision come to pass if I'm so far away? He's taken away from all the comforts that he has. He's taken away from all the safety. And sometimes we're called to do the same thing. When we have a vision from God, we're called to move away from the things that are comfortable, the things that are natural, and step out into the things that God calls us to that might feel unnatural. It might make us feel like foreigners in the land that we're in. It might make us feel like we're outcasts to the people that are around us. John 15 verse 19 says, if you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. You know, Joseph was despised by his brothers, thrown away into captivity and taken to a faraway land. Now, we might not be called to go to a faraway land, but we're called to live as foreigners within that land, that we don't assimilate to the culture of that land, but we show our own culture through the way we live our lives in that land that we're called to. You know, your land that you're called to might just be Rugeley, it might just be your street, but that means that we're not called to assimilate and grow and become the way that the street is, but we show a different way through being the way that God called us to be. A.W. Tozer said this. He said, modern Christians hope to save the world by being like it, but it will never work. The church's power springs out of her unlikeness to it, never from her integration into it. You know, so many times we can say, okay, we will make our service as appealable to people as possible. We'll try and make it as worldly as we can without losing the gospel. And, you know, to a point that's okay. We can say, okay, we want to make it appealing, but we should never lose the gospel. We should never lose the truth that Jesus came. The difference is what draws people in. You know, so many times I've heard people come in throughout the years and come into church. They've never been in church before. And they just say, wow, there's something different. There's just something different about being here. How could we ever change the world if all we do is become like it? We're called to be different to the world, not to assimilate to it, but to become unlike the world, so that we become an example for those people around us. So that's point number 3. Sometimes you have to become a foreigner in the land that you're in. Point number 4 is your character will strengthen and nurture your vision. You know, Joseph's character was put to the test when Potiphar's wife, Potiphar was the person that he was taken into slavery for, and he looked after his household. And his wife took a shine to him and decided that she was going to try and seduce Joseph. And Joseph could have quite easily said, well, this is my lot. Why not take the perks? If you excuse the sort of crudeness. But he says his character was something that set him apart. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. And she kept going. It wasn't just one off, but she kept trying, she kept trying, she kept trying. And every time Joseph said no, to the point where he literally fled from the room as she tried to grab hold of him. And this caused a whole world of trouble for Joseph. Sometimes your character, standing firm on what you believe, will feel like it's going to cause a whole world of trouble. You will end up in situations that you think are impossible, but just because it feels impossible doesn't mean it's the wrong situation to be in. As long as our character is steadfast and planted within Christ, if we take Christ as the foundation for our lives, Christ is the example that we follow, then our character is the roots that grow into that foundation. Our character grows into Christ, and roots serve sort of 2 purposes. They give it strength, but also they give it nurturement, if that's a word. Nourishment, that's the word. They nurture the plant. They allow good things to come up through the root system and then feed the plant. And that's exactly the same, that our character feeds our lives, that as we're planted in Christ, that goodness and nourishment comes up from Christ, grows up through us, and then develops the fruit. That's the fruit that we show in our lives. You know, I'm going to quickly turn to Romans chapter 5, verse 1 to 5, and I'll just read it quickly. It says, therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom also we have access by faith into the grace in which we stand, and rejoice in hope of the glory of God. And not only that, but we also glory in tribulations. That seems like a weird thing to do, doesn't it? To glory in tribulations. But this is why. It says we glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, and perseverance character, and character hope. Now hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit who was given to us. Joseph found himself in tribulations. He found himself in a trial that must have seemed absolutely impossible. But what happened was Joseph, in those tribulations, he stood fast to what God had called him to. And in standing fast, it produced perseverance, and that perseverance developed his character. To stand on the word of Christ and say, this is what God says about my life, produces character in us. It produces godly character. And then that character produces hope. If Joseph at any point had lost hope, he might have just given up and said, you know what, this is my lot, I can't do any more, I'm stuck here. But the character within him allowed him to have hope for a brighter future. Point number 5 is this: sometimes your vision will require you to put somebody else's vision above your own. Sometimes your vision will require you to put somebody else's vision above your own. Joseph had loads of times where he could have just said, well, my vision's not coming to pass, why should I help you? You know, when he was taken into slavery, he was put into Potiphar's house, but he didn't decide that he was just going to sulk and do the very least that he had to and just live the life of a slave. but he decided that he would do the best that he could. And as a result, he was made the head of Potiphar's house, to the point where Potiphar didn't even know what was going on. He just said, you know what, Joseph, you take care of it. As long as I've got food on my table, I'm happy. He was made the head of that household. And then when he was thrown into prison, he was made overseer of the entire prison, that he was in charge of everything that went on in there. The prison guard just said, you run it, I'll make sure. Joseph said, I'll make sure that everything runs smoothly. And then when the butler comes along and he says, this is my dream, Joseph could have said, well, that's a really nice dream. But he didn't. He said, this is what it means. He used his giftings to enable somebody else to grow. You know, through all three of those, the person that received the benefit of Joseph's use was the other people. Joseph did the very best in Potiphar's house. Potiphar would have been seen as, wow, he's got a really good household. You know, in the prison, he did the very best and ran it the best it could be. The prison guard would have been seen as, wow, this prison is run really well. When he gave the butler the vision for his, the meaning for his vision, the butler would have been the person that got the reward because he was set free. But also there was another person that Joseph used his giftings for, and that was the baker. Now, we can look at all those positives, but the baker had quite a negative sort of outcome, that when Joseph told him what his vision meant, that actually he was going to die in 3 days, you know. I can kind of imagine Joseph being head of the prison, and he walks in, and it says that he saw that the baker and the butler were both sad that morning. And so I'd imagine Joseph sort of walks into the cell that they're in. He's like, morning guys, here's your breakfast. What's the matter? You seem upset. And they say, well, we've both had dreams and no one can tell us what they mean. And so the butler, Joseph says, well, you know what? I'm pretty good at determining dreams. God's given me a few in my time. Let me have a go at it. He probably worded it slightly different to that. But he said, I can interpret the dream for you. And so the butler says, okay, well, here's my dream. And he gives him the dream that he's had. And Joseph says, wow, that's brilliant. 3 days and you're going to be set free and restored to the position that you were in. And then the baker thinks, well, that's pretty good. And I remember my dream sort of had 3s in it and stuff. So maybe. So he tells him his vision. And Joseph could have quite easily sort of taken his vision and said, yeah, okay, 3 days and then a bird's pecking at bread. You're going to go to the seaside, to Barmouth. There's going to be a few seagulls around, but it's going to be lovely. You're going to have a really nice time. Don't worry about it. It's going to be great. You're going to go away, see the sea. It's going to be wonderful. He could have lied to him. He could have, Joseph knew what it meant. He knew that in 3 days he was going to die. He was going to be put to death. Joseph could have made his last 3 days a bit nicer, really, couldn't he? He could have said, you know what? It's going to be lovely. You'll just wait. It's a nice surprise. Pharaoh's going to take you away to one side and send you off to the seaside. It's going to be lovely. But he didn't. He told him the truth. Sometimes people have a vision that isn't the vision that God's called for them, and we have to be able to tell them that isn't what God's called you to. Now, that doesn't mean that we go around and kick them and say, no, that's a load of rubbish, what are you playing at? Get in touch with God and try again. But we say, actually, you know what, that vision isn't going to lead to life, that vision is going to lead to death. Sometimes people have a totally misconceived idea of what God's vision is for their lives, or they don't even know that it's God, but they take their own vision and say, this is the vision that I'm going to run with, this is the direction that I'm going in. Sometimes we have to be called like Joseph to be honest and tell people, actually, no, that vision isn't leading you down the right path. One of the things that was said when we were away at Soul Survivor was that when we're down, it's the perfect opportunity to lift somebody else up. You know, if somebody was stood here and I wanted to help them up onto the stage, I'm higher than them to start with. I can give them a hand and pull them up onto the stage, and they're at the same height as me. But if I wanted to lift somebody up above me, I'm not going to be able to just sort of pick them up. I have to get down first and lift them up. You know, you might feel like you're in the low point. It's a perfect opportunity to lift somebody else's vision up above yours, to honour somebody else, to say, you know what, I'm not sure where I'm going, but let me help you. Let me see your vision and I'll lift you up. We can be in those low places and still be useful, but sometimes it means putting other people's vision ahead of our own vision, and in doing so, trusting that when we lift other people up, that when they see we're down, they lift us up as well. Then point number 6 is to be content, but never settle. You know, we mentioned that Joseph was put in charge of the household, and then he was put in charge of the prison. And then when he was released from the prison, that he was put in charge of the country. He was second only to Pharaoh. At any of those points, Joseph could have settled and said, you know what, I'm in charge, there's people bowing down to me, there's people who respect me, I'm over people. This is obviously the fulfillment of God's vision. The brothers were just a metaphor for people around me. That wasn't what God actually meant. I'll just settle with this. This is fine. Being in charge of the household's great. Or he might have said, you know what, being in charge of the prison, it's not the best, but I've still got position, I've still got title. And then when he's in charge of the country, he must have surely thought, quid's in here. It was only supposed to be my brothers that bowed down to me. Now I've got an entire country bowing down to me. God's vision was just so much better than I even thought. I misinterpreted it, but that's fine. It was so, you know, he could have settled for any of those 3 points and not seen the fulfillment of his promise. The promise was that his family would bow down to him, that his family would come to him and bow down. And at any of those 3 points, Joseph could have said, you know what, this will fulfill it, this will do, and settled in that position. You know, Paul in Philippians 4 verse 11 says, I have learned in whatever state I'm in to be content. But so often we confuse contentment for settling. We think contentment means that we just have to put up. This is our lot. We'll deal with it and we'll just do what we've got. God doesn't call us to settle in one place, but he says that even in the low times, find contentment. You know, contentment is about finding joy in the everyday situation that we find ourselves in. To say, you know what, I'm in this situation, but I know I'm moving through it. I know that I'm not here to stay because this isn't the fulfillment of the vision that God has for my life. I'm called to more. Settling says, this is my lot, so I'll make the best of it and do what I can. And so often people settle for the less and never see the fulfillment of the vision that God has because they don't find contentment, they find settling. And then point number 7 is God's vision is always bigger than your vision. Joseph saw the fulfillment of his vision when his father and his brothers came and bowed down before him. But what he got was an awful lot more as well. He got an entire country that came along and did exactly the same. You know, you get a vision from God and you see the small thing, but God has so much more. Kath touched on it last week when she talked about the Israelites moving into the promised land and that they saw bunches of grapes so big that you couldn't carry it with one person, it took 2 people. I was going to try and do a physical demonstration and get so many grapes that it needed 2 people to hold them, but I realised that would cost me a fortune. I would tap out all of Tesco's supply of grapes for a week, and that actually I don't really like grapes, and having to eat sort of so many bunches of grapes wouldn't be the best idea. So there we go, I could have done it, but I decided that maybe I would just mention it instead rather than actually have so many grapes, because I couldn't figure out a way to try and make a vine that I could hang grapes on. So I decided that I would just mention it, but you know, Kath said they have grapes so big, bunches of grapes, that it took 2 people to carry it. You know, when we think, if God says to us, I have a vision for you, it's going to be grapes, we think this, you know, one little basket. And God says, no, it's going to be this. It's going to be so big that it's more than you could even imagine. Ephesians 3:20 says, now to him who is able, what does it say? I've totally forgot. Yes, to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly, above all we could ask or think. You know, we have a vision and we think this is it. And then when we see the fulfillment of it, God says, actually, you thought of this, I gave you all of this. But so many people settle for this. They see the little and say, that's it, that's the fulfillment. They settle. But God says, you know what, actually, I have more. Be content, but never settle. So God's vision is always bigger than your vision. But how do we get that vision? Psalm 119 verse 105 says, your word is a light unto my feet and a lamp unto my path. When we find the word of God and implant it into our life, that gives us vision, it gives us direction. In John chapter 1 it says, in the beginning was the word was with God, and the word was God. The word, in him was life, and the life was the light of man. That life that Jesus brought is in the inside of us, and that is the light that directs our path, that gives us vision and a direction to follow. You know, Joseph could have said, we said at the start that he could have, when God revealed the plan to him, he could have said, actually, I'll just settle for the coat. I'll settle for what I've already got. But God had so much more available to him. The coat was merely a promise of the favour that was to come on his life. The coat was an initial reminder that actually, in whatever situation you go into, I've already given you favour, and that when you move through, you will find favour upon favour upon favour as you go through. You know, Joseph could have settled with his coat and said, I'm happy here, I've got what I need. But his coat was just a symbol that his father found favour with him. So when he got into Potiphar's house, that Potiphar found favour with him. When he got into the prison, that the prison guard found favour with him. And then when he got to Pharaoh, that Pharaoh found favour with him. And that would then bring the fulfilment of the promise that God had on your life. You know, so many times people struggle to find promises that God's given to them. You know, or any time that we look, we think it's just empty promises that I haven't seen the fulfilment of. If nothing else, one promise that we can hold on to is the promise that we have salvation and eternal life. That if you've been born again, if you've given your life to God, that you already have that promise of favour upon your life. That's the coat that we're then clothed in. But that's only a reminder of the things that are to come throughout our life. That is not the fulfilment, but that is the promise of the fulfilment to come. So I just want to quickly recap those 7 points if anyone missed any of them. The first thing is to have a vision or a dream. The second thing is that who you reveal the vision to will have an effect on your vision. The third thing is sometimes your vision will require you to be a stranger or a foreigner within the land or within the place that you're in. The fourth thing is that your character will strengthen and nurture your vision. The fifth thing is that sometimes your vision will require you to put somebody else's vision above your own. The sixth thing is to be content, but to never settle in the situation that you're in. And then the seventh thing is God's vision is always bigger than ours.
Right.
But the most important thing that we can take from Joseph's story, from Joseph's life, is that we have to be rooted upon God. We have to be rooted and fully focused on him. And we're running slightly short of time, but what I wanted to do is I just wanted to finish with a song that I felt really sort of, as I was going through this week and trying to figure out different bits of what I was going to say, that I felt this song just sort of resonated with the message of building our lives upon God. Now the words are going to come up on the screen, hopefully, if Alex is on the ball. If he's fallen asleep, Sam will sort of kick him until he wakes up. But yeah, I want to finish with this song. I'm going to adjust Stuart's microphone. Cool. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever